Committee will come to order. House Armed Services Committee meets today to receive testimony from members of Congress on their national security priorities for fiscal year 2017 National Defense Authorization Act. Quick note on the format today: in consultation with the ranking member, we'll depart from our regular questioning process. Each witness will have 4 minutes to testify. Members of the committee may seek recognition by raising their hand or letting the staff know, and each would then be granted 2 minutes. As this hearing is intended to be a listening session, it is not my intention to engage in extended debate, rather to hear from our colleagues. We certainly look forward to today's testimony, and I will yield to the distinguished acting ranking member for any comments she would like to make.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Happy to join with you today, and I'll be listening as well to the presentations that we have. Thank you.
Thank the gentlelady for being here. Our first witnesses are the distinguished chair and distinguished ranking member of the House Small Business Committee, and I'll say I am particularly pleased with the cooperation between our two committees over the past several years in getting a lot of things done for small businesses engaged in national security. Chairman Chabot and Ranking Member Velasquez, thank you for being here. Chairman, you're recognized for 4 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and we really do appreciate the cooperation that we've had with this committee. You've been great, and we, on a bipartisan basis, we appreciate it. And we look forward to working with this committee to ensure that small businesses continue to provide the Department of Defense and the federal government with solutions and foster innovation and competition that provide value to the taxpayer and strength and agility to the warfighter. Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member, we appreciate your help, we really do, and thank you for the opportunity to share a few thoughts about the fiscal year 2017 National Defense Authorization Act. Let me begin by thanking the committee for its collaboration, as I say, and in my 20 years on the committee, I've enjoyed seeing this relationship blossom, and the hard-fought passage of last year's NDAA was a success for our national security, for our men and women in uniform, and for our small business industrial base. We look forward to continuing that relationship with this year's bill, and I want to congratulate you on passing last year's bill and for your commitment to ensuring that the NDAA remains a vital national security policy bill. As you well know, improving acquisition and procurement at the Pentagon is critical to national security because it delivers real benefits to our warfighters. Very often, small companies can provide better products and services to our military in shorter periods of time, and importantly, at lower costs. When the Defense Department has fewer offers, there is less competition, costs go up, and choices are limited. Unfortunately, we continue to see that the number of companies competing for federal contracts declining, which threatens competition and harms readiness. Within the last 3 years, we've lost over 25% of the small firms registered to do business with the federal government. Within the Department of Defense, the number of small business contract actions fell 47% from 2011, but the size of the average individual small business contract action more than doubled. Not surprisingly, during the same period, the percentage of taxpayer dollars spent without competition has increased. As Chairman Thornberry frequently says, we need to focus on getting more defense for the dollar, and competition by small businesses is a major part of that solution. With this thought in mind, 15 members of the Small Business Committee introduced contracting bills this year. Working closely with our colleagues, Ranking Member Nydia Velasquez, here with me today, and I collected these common sense reforms, plus many other solid reforms, and put them into one bill, H.R. 4341, the Defending America's Small Contractors Act of 2016. We were able to approve H.R. 4341 unanimously earlier this year. This bill not only reflects our priorities, but also the members of the committee in a bipartisan manner as well on the Small Business Committee. While I provided more detail in my written statement, I'd like to share with you the 5 ways H.R. 4341 helps small contractors compete. First, it modernizes the Small Business Act to ensure that the language used is clear and consistent across federal procurement programs. Second, it strengthens the small business advocates within SBA, DOD, and other federal agencies to promote competition and make sure the laws on the books, including the NDAA, are followed. Third, it improves opportunities for small businesses to compete for subcontracts and then to build on that experience to compete as prime contractors. Fourth, it improves coordination between the SBA and DoD mentor-protege programs, which help small businesses better serve our military. And finally, the bill implements common sense reforms to ensure integrity and accountability in small business programs, such as size standards, veterans contracting programs, and contracting officer training programs. In the coming weeks, I also expect our committee to approve additional legislation that reauthorizes and strengthens the Small Business Innovation Research Program, the SBIR. I'd respectfully ask the committee to incorporate all of these provisions into this year's NDAA. Our nation needs a robust small business industrial base. It's vital to both the health of our economy and our national security. We appreciate your time here this morning, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate it. The Ranking Member Velasquez.
Okay, yeah, let me move over. You want to come over?
Sorry, we should have had more than one microphone out there.
Switch places.
To make sure. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Acting Ranking Member, for giving us this opportunity to come before you. And I just want to take this opportunity for our continued collaboration between these two committees. For several decades now, the federal government has looked to the private sector to provide services and supplies for its day-to-day operations, and the Department of Defense is at the heart of this buying power, accounting for over half of all contracting dollars. As such, a vibrant industrial base has become essential not only to the U.S. economy, but most importantly, to our national security. The defense industrial base relies on a supply chain that is diverse and agile, so it should come as no surprise that to those in this room that small businesses are at the heart of this chain. With a strong presence in a variety of different industries, from construction to manufacturing, small businesses continue to play a vital role in providing our government with goods and services. Yet, in order to continue the resurgence of the industrial base, we need to ensure that small businesses are able to compete both globally and here in America. Competition is good, Mr. Chairman, for both taxpayers and for small businesses. Here at home, this means opening up the nearly $500 billion federal marketplace to small firms. Numerous policies and protections has been put in place to allow for their continued participation in this arena, thereby securing our country's industrial base. However, it appears that we have stalled in removing barriers to the marketplace. Chairman Chabot and I have been longtime members of the House Small Business Committee, and we can both tell you that it's getting harder for small businesses, not easier, and that is why we're here today. From the difficulty firms face in accessing the entrepreneurial development needed to help getting a contract, to the uncertainty of programs like SBIR, changes are needed that will allow small businesses to compete in the marketplace. Over the years, we have seen the value of small businesses' contracts go up, enabling agencies to meet their goals, but at the same time, the number of contractors has dwindled. In the last 4 years, the number of contractors registered to do business with the federal government has decreased by approximately 100,000 firms. I think we can all agree that the disappearance of 100,000 firms is a problem for our country's national security. That is why Chairman Chabot and I, along with the other members of the House Small Business Committee, came together to author H.R. 4341, the Defending America's Small Contractor Act of 2016. This bipartisan bill addresses just some of the many issues that small businesses have indicated they face when competing for contracts. As the chairman indicated, our joint written statement will provide you with further details regarding H.R. 4341. However, this bill increases transparency, provides clarity and uniformity, strengthens competition, and eliminates barriers to the marketplace. The landscape of federal contracting is evolving, With agencies moving to larger procurement vehicles, we must secure our industrial base and ensure that small businesses are not left at the wayside, and that is exactly what H.R. 4341 does. Therefore, I join the chairman in strongly advocating for the complete bill's inclusion in the FY 2017 National Defense Authorization Act. I thank you again for allowing us to testify here today. Thank you.
Well, let me thank you both again for your contribution. I think the sense we have is, just as both of you have testified, it's getting harder and harder, especially for small business, to do business with the Department of Defense. And that's why our committee on a bipartisan basis is so focused on trying to improve the way the Department of Defense does acquire goods and services. And the bill that y'all have introduced and passed out of committee is certainly something that we want to take a serious look at in that effort. Are there any questions for these witnesses? Not. Thank you both again for being here, and I appreciate it. Let me ask unanimous consent that the complete written statement of these and all witnesses be made part of the record without objection. In addition, the chair has received some written statements from members who are not able to be here to testify, and I ask unanimous consent that they also be made part of our record without objection. Next, pleased to welcome the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Rothfuss, for his testimony. Gentleman's recognized for 4 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman. Chairman Thornberry, Acting Ranking Member Davis, and members of the committee, thank you for receiving my testimony on the National Defense Authorization Act for fiscal year 2017. In an increasingly dangerous world, there is no greater constitutional responsibility of Congress than providing for the common defense of our nation. Yet meeting this obligation has become increasingly difficult in recent years due to avoidable and unnecessary fiscal constraints. It is a result of these constraints that our military has been forced to implement policies like the Army's Aviation Restructure Initiative, which I have long opposed. As you may recall, I have appeared before this committee each year since ARI to raise the alarm that the plan is dangerous, short-sighted, and will significantly harm our national security. Specifically, ARI will have devastating impacts on the National Guard, stripping it of its Apaches and ensuring that it will be less combat-ready and less able to provide operational depth. It will also deprive our nation of an operational reserve for these aircraft, which is essential to the retention and management of talented air crews. Post 9/11, the National Guard has become a highly experienced and capable combat force. Yet ARI represents a fundamental shift in the nature and role of the National Guard and runs counter to the wisdom and preference of many members of Congress and their constituents. This conclusion is bolstered by the recent report and recommendations offered by the National Commission on the Future of the Army. I join my colleagues in urging this committee to create the NCFA to offer a deliberate assessment of the ARI. After extensive discussion and analysis, the Commission soundly rejected the Army's plan. Instead, the Commission proposed an alternative plan to maintain 4 National Guard Apache battalions equipped with 18 aircraft each. The plan also proposes to add 2 Black Hawk battalions to the National Guard. In the Commission's opinion, this offers, quote, significant advantages, close quote, relative to ARI by providing greater wartime capacity, improved operating tempo, higher wartime surge capacity, and contributing to a key goal of achieving one Army that works and trains together in peacetime and, if necessary, fights together in war. Last year, I fought to ensure that the Army could not move forward with the ARI until the Commission had completed its work. The time has come. We must put an end to ARI, implement the NCFA's recommendation, and retain a minimum of 4 Apache battalions in the National Guard. Of course, the question remains how these aviation assets will be distributed, and there are some who argue that the battalions should be located in single states. I would caution against this approach and instead point to the many positive benefits that come from multi-state units, such as the agreement that was reached between my home state of Pennsylvania and South Carolina. Under the terms of these agreements, one state would retain a battalion headquarters and 2 companies of Apaches. The other state would retain the remaining company. By expanding the footprint of the Apache battalions, the National Guard will maximize its ability to recruit and retain talented pilots and crew from different regions of the United States. Multi-state units will also ensure that National Guard companies can regularly participate in collective training and maintenance with the regular Army. thereby advancing the Army's objective for total force integration. Finally, multi-state units will provide strategic rowback depth in the National Guard should the need arise in the future to reestablish additional Apache battalions, such as the 1st 104th, that have been disbanded. While addressing current fiscal constraints is important, we must proceed in such a way that will maximize our readiness and ability to surge in times of war. Time and again, the brave members of the National Guard have risen to the occasion and heeded the call to defend our nation, both at home and abroad. By taking the steps that I have identified here today, Congress can ensure that they may continue to do so for years to come. I thank the Chairman.
Thank the gentleman. Any questions for the gentleman from Pennsylvania? Not. I appreciate gentlemen being here. I agree that I think there's a lot of support for the Army Commission. They did what we asked them to do, and we will definitely consider those recommendations very carefully. I appreciate the gentleman for being here. Next, we have the gentleman from Arkansas, Mr. Crawford. Appreciate the gentleman being here. Your full written statement will be made part of the record. Gentleman's recognized for 4 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Thornberry, Ranking Member Smith. I'd like to thank Ms. Davis as well, my co-chair of the Congressional EOD Caucus. And I want to present to you several priorities for FY17 NDAA. I applaud the Chairman and Ranking Member's personal interest in streamlining DoD processes for research, development, and acquisition. In that spirit, I request enacting the EOD Caucus's proposed language that would establish a fully joint EOD program with the Navy as executive agent for DoD to coordinate and integrate RD&A for EOD defense programs. Currently, Secretary of Defense has designated the Secretary of the Navy as the single service manager for common EOD technology and training. This approach creates a nightmare of logistics and paperwork that results in years of delays in fielding crucial EOD technology. Second, we have concerns that the Army has been quietly duplicating roles, responsibilities, and mission sets of its EOD force into that of the chemical force. Briefly, the Army Chemical Corps has taken credit to senior Army leadership for the EOD force's accomplishments over the last 15 years. All of this at the same time that the Chemical Corps has experienced regular mission failure and has not deployed to any theater in the last 15 years to conduct their primary mission. The EOD formations are the ones who provide scalable and tailorable mission command. Tactical EOD units conduct weapons defeat, weapons disablement, and weapons disposal activities. In that spirit, please also consider enacting EOD Caucus's proposed language on Title 10, United States Code, Chapter 307, Section 3063, which strikes Chemical Corps and inserts Explosive Ordnance Disposal Corps as a basic branch of the Army. Third, I urge the publishing of directive report language using the EOD Caucus's proposed language for the Secretary of the Army to provide a brief and report on the Army EOD branch proponent no later than December 1st, 2016 to the committee. Finally, our national security is our biggest priority, and when restructuring the end strengths of the armed forces, we need to slow down the process. It's especially important to maintain a strong and agile military in the face of emerging threats. I recommend incorporating the end strength numbers from the Posture Act within the NDAA for fiscal year 17, and with that, I yield back.
I thank the gentleman and appreciate his recommendations. Are there any questions, gentleman from Arkansas? Again, because of your personal experience, we really appreciate your expertise, and I know that Ms. Davis will be bringing those issues forward, and so we can consider them that you mentioned. So, thank you, sir. Next, we have the distinguished gentleman from New York, Mr. Hanna. Thank you for being here. Gentleman's recognized for 4 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Thornberry and Ranking Member Davis. I'm here today to respectfully request that the committee take action on two important issues: contracting reform and cybersecurity. The Small Business Committee recently marked up the Defending American Small Business Contractors Act, which seeks to assist small businesses in competing for federal contracts. I want to speak briefly in support of Section 302 of this bill. This provision would create a voluntary pilot program at the SBA that would provide first-tier subcontracting small businesses with performance ratings based on their previously completed work. One challenge facing many small businesses competing for larger federal contracting opportunities is that it is difficult for them to gain recognition for their past first-tier work as subcontractors. This prevents them from bidding, from using their track record they need to compete for larger prime contracts. As a contractor myself and the chairman of the subcommittee on contracting and workforce, I'm confident that these changes will lead to more competition in the marketplace, which will lead to lower costs. This committee has taken the lead on contracting and acquisition reform. I respectfully urge you to include Section 302 in the National Defense Authorization Act for fiscal year 2017. It is a sensible change that creates more opportunity for small business contractors and brings greater competition to the marketplace. The second issue I want to bring to the committee's attention is very important to my district. I have the privilege of representing the Air Force Research Lab in Rome, New York, which is home to some of the most advanced cybersecurity research in the world. Our country faces unprecedented challenges in cyberspace, which demand robust solutions that tap into the total force of our country's military, including the Guard and Reserve personnel. At this committee's urging, the Army recently conducted an analysis of its cyber capacities. It found that the Guard is well placed to contribute to defensive cyber operations, but has yet to effectively bring them into the fold. While the National Guard Bureau has named 10 Army cyber protection teams to be based in each of the 10 federal emergency management response regions, the Army has not allocated any funds to sustain them. Neither has it provided a long-term plan for integrating them into the cyber mission force. No approach to secure cyber domain is complete unless it utilizes the broad range of skills and assets possessed by the Guard personnel. Anyone familiar with Guard capacities knows how well suited its citizens are to take on an expanded cyber mission. These men and women of the Guard develop unique expertise in their private lives and can be ground ready within a moment's notice. I respectfully request that the members of this committee work with the Army to provide a long-term strategic plan for integrating the Army Guard personnel into cyber mission force for fiscal year 2017. In addition, I ask that you support the entire bill 4341. Thank you.
Thank the gentleman. Are there any questions? Again, I appreciate the gentleman on both issues. I know from our conversations last year, because of the gentleman's personal background and also your leadership position on small business, that we want to continue to work closely with you on improving contracting and acquisition, especially as it affects small business. So I appreciate gentleman's input. Next, we're pleased to welcome the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Meehan, who's recognized for 4 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank the ranking member and each of the members of this committee and my good friend, the gentleman from New Jersey, as well. And I want to express my deep appreciation, not just for your holding this hearing, but for taking the time to consider the real matters of priority setting with regard to our national defense. And I very much appreciate the opportunity to weigh in what I believe is a really pressing national security issue. The Marine Corps V-22 Osprey program has been involved in some of the most sophisticated combat operations since it became operational in 2009, and that's including, among them, the mission to eliminate Osama bin Laden. With the kind of flexibility it has, of course, you know, it flies like a helicopter, lands like a helicopter, flies like a plane, and it gives unmatched flexibility to the warfighter in the theater. Marine commanders will tell you that the Osprey gives them the unprecedented ability to move troops and material around the battlefield faster than ever before. It has also been one of America's best examples of its outreach to nations who are struggling with natural disasters. The Osprey is constructed at Boeing's facility in Ridley Park, Delaware County, and by Bell Helicopter in your home district, Amarillo, Texas, Mr. Chairman. But fundamentally, it's been purchased under a 5-year contract that Congress authorized in fiscal year 2013. And at that time, all 4 congressional defense committees, including this committee, supported that contract. For good reason. The contract saved nearly $1 billion over a single-year contracts, and it gave predictability to the industry to even drive further efficiencies and capabilities into the aircraft. But unfortunately, the President's fiscal year 2017 budget request unexpectedly reduced the procurement of the Osprey aircraft by 2 airframes. It increased the cost and termination liability that could ultimately lead to additional and unnecessary cost for the taxpayers. It's cut the potential to jeopardize the workforce at the Boeing facility in Ridley, and I would suspect similarly in Amarillo, Texas. And it will take vital tools out of the hands of our battlefield commanders. The only reason for the reduction is a budget from the White House that doesn't meet the needs of our warfighters. And it's why the Marine Corps itself actually requested that the 2 aircraft be replaced in its annual unfunded priorities list, which was submitted to the committee after this budget release. The V-22 Osprey has proven itself to be one of the most versatile aircraft in the Pentagon's inventory. Its success in action is a tribute to the men and women who fly the Osprey and to the skills of the workforce in both Ridley Park and in Amarillo that produce it. Congress and your respective committees in particular have reliably demonstrated strong support for the V-22 program, and I ask that your committee continue the steadfast approach by restoring 2 MV-22 airframes in the fiscal year 2017 budget. They're a good deal for our taxpayers, they support good-paying jobs, and most importantly, they're a vital tool for the men and women in the field. And I thank you for your consideration.
Thank you. Gentleman from New Jersey is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you. It's good to see that you came in and brought this to light. Certainly, we've been watching it from the days that we went over and saw this. It's about predictability. Most importantly, it's at V-22, who we hear as early as last week from the Commandant of the Marine Corps, how important it is for those 2 additional airframes. So we hear you loud and clear, and certainly we'll be pressing that matter. Thank you for your testimony.
I want to thank the gentleman. It was so critical. We've watched the workers on this program and their ability to create the efficiencies with the multi-year contracting, which has produced a better and more effective war machine and also saved money simultaneously. We're working against ourselves if we allow this to go forward as directed by the administration. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, and we yield back.
Other questions? I appreciate the gentleman's testimony. I think he makes the case very well.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Appreciate it. Let's see. Next, we welcome the gentlelady from California, Ms. Chu, before the committee. The gentlelady is recognized for 4 minutes.
Chairman Thornberry and Ranking Member Davis, next month we'll recognize the 5th anniversary of the death of my nephew, Harry Liu. Harry was determined to serve his country in any way he could. He enlisted in the Marine Corps and deployed to Afghanistan in 2011. My family beamed with pride. We never could have imagined the tragedy that would ensue. While in Afghanistan, he was the victim of military hazing. In the middle of the night, his fellow Marines took it upon themselves to administer so-called corrective training for almost 4 hours. They tormented, abused, and degraded him. They forced him to carry a 25-pound sandbag and perform useless, unnecessary exercise while he was clad in his full body armor. After they kicked, punched, and stomped on his back, they nearly smothered him with the contents of his sandbag. 22 minutes after this torture, Harry took his own life, and my family was forever changed. Yet, Harry was not the only one. Over the years, I have heard stories of other service members who also experienced hazing so arduous it led to their deaths. Private Danny Chen also served in Afghanistan in 2011. He was also a victim of racially based hazing, and like Harry, Danny took his own life. I've made it my mission to end hazing in our armed services because it is unacceptable and indefensible. I worked to secure reports from the military branches in the 2013 National Defense Authorization Act. The reports revealed the overall lack of reliable information and data on hazing, including serious deficiencies in the tracking and treatment of hazing by the Department of Defense. Therefore, I urge the committee to include language for a Government Accountability Office report on the current status of hazing in the military in the 2015 National Defense Authorization Act. With your assistance, this language was indeed included, and I thank all of you for doing that. Congress received this report this last month. Today, we have an independent analysis that found that DOD anti-hazing policies are not being implemented, training is unclear, and tracking systems are highly divergent and underdeveloped. More specifically, we learned that DOD is not aware of the extent to which the department's hazing policies have been implemented. In December 2015, DOD released an updated policy memorandum on hazing, but as the GAO indicates, it does not go far enough to ensure that the policies are being implemented consistently and thoroughly. GAO underscored the need to better define hazing in order to teach service members how to identify it. It emphasized the need to vastly improve the military services tracking mechanisms, which are incomplete and inconsistent, preventing us from having the reliable data that would help determine root causes and propose real solutions. Lastly, the GAO indicates that the DOD has not evaluated the prevalence of hazing in a meaningful way. Given these objective findings, I request that as the House Armed Services Committee prepares the 2017 National Defense Authorization Act, language is included to, number one, require DOD to submit an annual report to Congress to ensure that anti-hazing policies are implemented consistently. Secondly, require DOD to improve existing training to help service members better identify and respond to hazing at all command levels. Third, mandate that DOD issue a department-wide guidance on a comprehensive and consistent data collection system that includes information on protected classes such as race and religion. And fourth, evaluate the prevalence of hazing through department-wide surveys. Only when we have these changes in place can we truly begin to eliminate hazing in the military. Thank you, Chairman Thornberry and Ranking Member Davis, for allowing me to discuss my legislative priorities for the 2017 NDAA. I urge Congress to take action to eradicate hazing in the military.
Well, let me just thank you, Ms. Chu, for not only for being here, but for your commitment to this issue and following through on it. It's something that I not only appreciate but admire. As you mentioned, we have had provisions related to this issue in each, I think, of the 4 last House-passed NDAAs. One year it didn't make, we couldn't persuade our colleagues in the Senate. But also, as you mentioned, we just received the report from the FY15 bill. We want to look at that carefully, and we will absolutely consider your suggestions on how to further get better information so that we can see what may be appropriate. Are there other questions for the gentlelady from California? Great. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Appreciate you being here. Gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Perry, is welcomed and recognized for 4 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member, members of the committee for this opportunity. Appreciate the ability to have some input. Today I focus my remarks on one decision of particular concern with many of our fellow members of the House, the the Army's proposed Aviation Restructure Initiative, or ARI, and its negative impacts on our reserve component, which are highlighted by the report and recommendations offered by the National Commission on the Future of the Army. Mr. Chairman, at the height of the wars in Iraq and in Afghanistan, nearly 50% of the Army's total force was reserve component. As a matter of fact, proud of my own state, Pennsylvania, the Guard alone there contributed more than 21,000 individual deployments to these theaters, including one of my own where I was privileged to command a task force of Army aviators across the full spectrum of operations, from attack to reconnaissance to heavy lift to general support. Now, according to cost savings calculations provided by the Army, none of the projected $12 billion in cost savings is derived from moving Apaches, the H-64, from the National Guard to the regular Army. ARI would leave the National Guard less combat ready at most, and most importantly, less able to provide operational depth. You see, Mr. Chairman, the experience in the attack community, as you know, is in the Guard. It's because of multiple deployments and the complexity of flying the Apache. You can learn to fly the Apache in several months, but to become a true Apache pilot takes years and years of dedication. Folks simply get tired of being deployed all the time and working at that tempo, but they still want to serve, so they come to the Guard. And so where you have an 800-hour cockpit in the active component downrange, you'll have a 4,500-hour cockpit in the Guard. It's not meant to disparage one or the other. It's just where the operational depth is located. ARI would further reduce the connective tissue that binds the Army and the National Guard, since Apaches would then constitute an area where the two cannot work together. Mr. Chairman, at all the times where those of us that serve in the military say we're an army of one. How can we be an army of one when one has and one does not? When one goes to replace and doesn't have the components or the training to replace? I mean, you can't say it, but not do it. This represents a fundamental shift in the nature and role of the National Guard and runs counter to the years and billions of dollars invested by the taxpayers. We used to be a strategic reserve. I was in the Guard back then when we went to summer camp. That's been over for years and years and years, and the taxpayers have paid dearly for an operational reserve, which is what the Guard and the Reserve has become, as evidenced by how many times we deploy. The National Commission on the Future of the Army rejected the ARI, the Aviation Restructure Initiative, after comparing it to a number of alternatives. Other significant advantages over the ARI include allowing for greater wartime capacity. You can reach back to the Guard when active components have deployed over and over and over again. Improved operational tempo because you can schedule that stuff. Higher wartime surge capacity. Otherwise, there is none. If you do everything you've got with the active component and you're tapped out, there's not going to be anybody to reach back to under the ARI. And it balances the force. It creates light components so we can be an army of one, so we can replace one another when we need to, and achieves the goal of an army that works together, trains together in peacetime, and if and when necessary, can deploy together and fight in a war. And finally, Mr. Chairman, in the remaining few seconds I have, if, as the Commission says, there should be two more ARBs, those two should be located in the Guard based on cost and, quite honestly, nearly every single other metric, including arms inspections results, safety, and success in combat. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
So just to be clear, gentleman supports the commission recommendations, correct?
Indeed, I do, sir.
Okay, thank you. Any questions? Great. Thank you, sir. Appreciate you being here. Next, we have the distinguished gentleman from the state of Maine, Mr. Poliquin. Welcome, sir. You're recognized for 4 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it very much, and thank you very much, Ranking Member Davis, for the opportunity to be here today. There are 3 topics I would like to talk to you about, if I may. First, deals with the Berry Amendment. The Berry Amendment law requires, as we all know, that standard issuance equipment be Berry compliant. And the only piece of equipment, to my knowledge, that recruits today in all branches of the military are not issued are athletic shoes. And that's because a period of time, there were no athletic shoe manufacturers in America that were, in fact, Berry compliant. However, that has changed. The New Balance Shoe Company that has 3 plants in Maine, my district, this is really important, Mr. Chairman, to my district, 900 employees in Skowhegan, Norridgewock, and in Naples, Maine, make the best athletic shoes in the world. In fact, right now, I'm wearing a pair. You just can't see them, but they're on my feet right now, and they're terrific. All I'm asking, sir, is that the Department of Defense obey the law and make a standard issuance piece of equipment, athletic shoes, that are fully Berry compliant. The New Balance Shoe Company has retooled their manufacturing process, invested millions in doing this, and as I said, they are now completely Berry Amendment compliant. Now, Congresswoman Tsongas has language that she has submitted to be included in the NDAA, and we please ask you to support that language, which would solve this problem and require the Department of Defense to issue Berry Amendment compliant athletic shoes for all of our recruits. That's the first thing, sir. The second one, Mr. Chair, is that I am very grateful that in last year's NDAA authorization, there was an additional DDG-151 destroyer that was put in that authorization. And also the Navy has committed to make sure the incremental funding for the complete procurement of that destroyer be included in the process. All I'm asking you folks to do, please, is make sure you support the fully funding of that additional DDG-51. These are the best battleships in the world, sir. They're made in Bath, Maine. They have a frontline multi-mission purpose, including a ballistic defense missile defense. So it's really important for our national security. There are 6,000 Mainers that are employed at Bath Iron Works that manufactures, creates, builds these best destroyers in the world. And please, I ask you to support the full funding of this additional DDG-151. Thirdly, I'm introducing a bill, Mr. Thornberry, called the Fair Treatment of our National Guard and Reservists Act. Now, this is something that is so common sense to so many Mainers that rely on common sense to get through the long winters up there. Right now, if you're a federal employee and you travel beyond 50 miles to do your work, and you are not reimbursed for travel expenses, let's say gas, food, and lodging, then those expenses are tax deductible. But if you're a guardsman or woman, or you're in our reserve, the law requires you to travel over 100 miles to receive the same treatment. So now that's just not fair. I mean, these are folks that are being trained to make sure they can protect our country, as Mr. Perry just testified with respect to the Guard. All we're asking is that the IRS treat our guardsmen and reservists the same way as they treat every other federal employee, making sure that if they travel beyond 50 miles, not 100 miles, they can use those travel expenses as a tax deduction. Now, my request, Mr. Thornberry, if I may, is simply that the Secretary of Defense conduct a study such that we know what the cost is to our guardsmen and our reservists for this travel beyond 50 miles, so we can see what the fiscal note will be. So in three things I'm asking for today, Mr. Chairman, if I may, in summary. Number one, please include Chairwoman Tsongas's language into the appropriate parts of the law that requires the Department of Defense to obey the Berry Amendment law and issue athletic shoes, Berry Amendment athletic shoes for our recruits. Secondly, please make sure you support the fully funding of our additional DDG-151 destroyer made up in Bath, Maine. And thirdly, support my bill that asks the Secretary of Defense to create a study such that we know what the cost is to our guardsmen and our reservists with respect to reimbursement deductions, travel deductions beyond 50 miles.
Great. I think the gentleman makes the case on each of the 3 points very well. Are there any questions? Not. I appreciate the gentleman being here.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I appreciate it.
Next, we're pleased to welcome the gentlelady from the state of Missouri, Mrs. Wagner, before the committee. The gentlelady is recognized for 4 minutes.
Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, it is a joy to be in front of you again this year, and I thank you for your time. I want to begin by thanking you for your steadfast commitment to our nation's most pressing national security matters. In that vein, I want to highlight the growing stresses on the demands for United States naval tactical aviation. As you know, the ongoing wartime operations against the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant have greatly increased operational tempo of our tactical aircraft. The carrier-based aircraft, F-18 Hornets and Super Hornets, have been the backbone of the force projection and engagement. Last year, the Chief of Naval Operations testified that his Navy faced a shortage of operational aircraft. This is commonly referred to as the tactical aviation shortfall. Congress and your committee, sir, led the way, addressing part of this challenge with added aircraft in fiscal year 2016. However, the President has not budgeted to take on the challenge more robustly in this year's budget. Only 2 Super Hornet aircraft were added in the OCO in response to training and operational losses. The fiscal year 2018 budget shows a demand for 14 more aircraft, but there still is a potential gap this year. These actions taken to address the tactical aviation shortfall are not enough. That is why the Chief of Naval Operations will provide Congress with an unfunded requirement request for 12 additional Super Hornets above the President's budget. There remains a shortfall of at least 36 Super Hornet aircraft in total. Given the critical capability that the Super Hornet provides for ongoing wartime operations, any shortfall is dangerous to the Navy's ability to project force throughout the world. This unfunded requirement request helps mitigate that shortfall, anticipating that the Navy will follow through on its promise to add aircraft in the next year's budget deliberation. In years past, your committee has been incredibly responsive to the warfighter's most pressing needs. The budget is unfunded requirement request demonstrates how important tactical aviation is to the Navy's mission. The Super Hornet is providing that critical capability today at the most affordable cost. I ask that you urgently consider the Navy's unfunded request and add 12 F-18 Super Hornets to the President's budget to address the tactical aviation shortfall and, more importantly, the warfighter's needs. I look forward to working with you throughout the year on this issue, and I thank you for the consideration of this request. We ask that you take into consideration the recent demands placed on naval tactical aviation as you consider the President's budget request for fiscal year 2017. I yield back.
Great. Any questions of the gentlelady? Thank you, ma'am. I appreciate you continuing to be such a strong advocate on this issue. The budget presents a number of challenges for us, but we will certainly be looking at the unfunded requirements list of all the services as we are able to meet additional needs. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the consideration, and we will stand ready at your service to provide any additional information for support. Thank you
much. Next, we're pleased to welcome the gentlelady, the delegate from American Samoa, Ms. Radowagan, before the committee. Thank you for being here, ma'am, and you're recognized for 4 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Thornberry, for the opportunity to testify today before the House Armed Services Committee in regards to H.R. 4341, the Defending America's Small Contractors Act. Particularly, I'll be addressing Section 505 of Title V of the bill, which I introduced on its own and has been included in H.R. 4341. As you may know, over the past decade, numerous reports issued by SBA's Office of the Inspector General and the Government Accountability Office have identified structural weaknesses in the SBA's Office of Government Contracts and Business Development's oversight of personnel and program management and control. Since FY 2014, 39% of all federal contract dollars have been awarded to small businesses, and in fulfilling its jurisdictional role, the House Small Business Committee is conducting oversight of the contracting programs run by the GCBD. However, because of the responsibility for implementing many of the programs rests outside of GCBD, and GCBD having limited influence over those responsible for the day-to-day operations of the program, the opportunity for waste, fraud, and abuse is prevalent. Meanwhile, regulation implementing statutory changes intended to help small businesses are taking 3 or more years to implement. Furthermore, many of the organizations within GCBD conduct duplicative activities, leaving open the possibility of greater inefficiencies and more bureaucracy for small businesses seeking to compete in the federal marketplace. Due to their importance, these issues were recently the topic of a hearing conducted by the House Small Business Committee's Subcommittee on Contracting and Workforce. As a result of the hearing and subsequent data, I introduced the Small Business Contracting and Acquisition Programs Efficiency Act, or SB CAPE Act, which has become Section 505 of Title V of H.R. 4341, the Defending America's Small Contractors Act. Specifically, Section 505 requires GAO to examine the extent to which SBA personnel who carry out certain procurement and business development programs report to the OGCBD, determine whether greater efficiency and consistency in the certification process of the procurement and business development programs could be achieved by creating a single organizational unit of employees to process all certifications required by such programs, determine whether greater efficiency and efficacy in the performance of such programs could be achieved by improving the alignment of the field personnel assigned to them, assess how the OGCBD could improve its staffing of regulatory drafting functions and its coordination with the Federal Acquisition Regulatory Council to ensure timely rulemaking by the SBA, and report on any other areas in which the GAO determines that SBA could improve its performance with respect to procurement and business development programs. The report will prove to be a valuable tool in helping Congress to ensure that those offices and programs within SBA which are created to help small businesses compete are fulfilling their statutory mission. The importance of this legislation plays in my home district of American Samoa. It cannot be overstated, as nearly all of the island's businesses qualify as a small business. Also, with proper organization, SBA will be a better partner to DoD as it seeks to strengthen the small business industrial base, one of the department's current objectives. I respectfully encourage the House Armed Services Committee to adopt H.R. 4341, the Defending America's Small Contractors Act, and include it in this year's National Defense Authorization Act. Thank you again for the important work this committee does and for allowing me this opportunity to testify before you today. With your assistance, I look forward to seeing this important legislation become law. I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank the gentlelady. Are there questions for the gentlelady? Gentleman from California, Mr. Knight.
No question, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to add my support to H.R. 4341. Part of this bill was an issue that we authored, the DoD's Mentor Protege Program, and this bill will streamline the Mentor Protege Program by utilizing SBA to help the DoD simplify the process for DoD's execution of their program. It goes back to exactly what you've been saying. We need to get more defense for the dollar, and I highly support this. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I appreciate the gentlelady giving us further background and explanation of that particular section. So I appreciate very much you being here and discussing the small business package, which the committee will definitely consider.
Thank you, Mr.
Next, we're pleased to welcome the gentleman from Nevada, Mr. Hardy, before the committee. Gentleman is recognized for 4 minutes.
Good morning, Chairman Thornberry and Ranking Member and members of the committee. I appreciate the opportunity to testify before you on National Defense Authorization Act for 2017. I want to first thank you for keeping small business and the procurement reform on top of mind when you crafted last year's NDAA. The small business community appreciates your efforts. To continue the conversation, I want to speak briefly concerning the small business contracting initiative that often gets less attention than it deserves. Many times in contracting, all of the efforts are concentrated on whether or not the fair competition is being observed. While this is absolutely paramount in our society, the person that wins the contract is often immediately thrown into a firestorm of compliance issues and burdens. Therefore, while we observe the pre-contract interactions, we also need to enhance the post-award compliance. With that said, I have introduced H.R. 4331, the Small Business Easy Contract Compliance Enhancement List Act of 2016, to rectify this issue. This is a straightforward legislation. It requires small business advocates of the SBA, along with other agencies that participate in the Mentor Protégé programs, to offer a list of resources to the contract awardees. To help reduce compliance burdens, Chairman Shabbat included post-award compliance language in his larger bill that offers important reforms for contractors and subcontractors. I encourage you to take a serious look at Chairman Shabbat's large contracting bill, H.R. 4341, the Defending America's Small Contractors Act of 2016. These reforms will truly impact small businesses, one of our country's truest economic drivers. I would also like to draw quickly to your attention an ongoing issue in my district that has national security implication. You got the word. My district in Nevada is a proud home of Nevada Test and Training Range, which is the largest continuous air and ground space available in the military training operation in the free world. It consists of 2.9 million acres of public land underneath approximately 12,000 square nautical miles of restricted airspace in the military operations area. The Air Force uses the NTTR to perform advanced exercises and tactics development in a multi-dimensional training environment unlike any other. Yet, despite the critical importance of the NTTR to our national security, multiple layers of duplicative regulations are preventing the Air Force from meeting defense test and training objectives due to the lack of ready access to the withdrawn land. This inability to fully utilize the withdrawn lands also denies full use of the restricted airspace overlaying the area, further restricting operational flexibility. Mr. Chairman, the Air Force has been conducting bombing and gunnery practice tactics development and electronic testing and training on these lands since 1940, a full 34 years before the Fish and Wildlife nominated the area for wilderness designation. And it is a flawed wilderness designation to begin with that refused to account for the existing military impacts on the land. What this all boils down to is the military should not be saddled with multiple layers of duplicative regulations that hinder the ability to adequately train for the mission that will keep America's people safe. While the Department of Defense and the Department of Interior have inherently different missions, there's no reason why they cannot better partner to arrive at the common sense solutions for the land and they co-manage. Mr. Chairman, my home state of Nevada is more than 85% federally controlled. While Nevadans may have their disagreements with the federal land management agencies, we are proud to welcome the military personnel who call our state home. We feel that a sense of duty and patriotism to have these vital training activities take place in Nevada, and we would like to nothing more than to allow our servicemen and women the freedom to train for their missions. And again, I'd like to thank the chairman and ranking member for the opportunity to speak to you today.
Thank you, sir. As I think you know, I was just out at the Nevada test site last November, and I agree completely. It is an incredible national asset, as our colleague from Nevada knows, and we want to make sure the country can benefit from the full use of it. So I think the value of that area is just unquestioned. Are there questions for the gentleman from Nevada? Not appreciate you being here and raising those issues. I thank you, sir. Next, we have the gentlelady from Tennessee, Ms. Blackburn. Thanks for being back with us, one of the strong advocates for our military. Gentlelady's recognized for 4 minutes.
To be back with you again, and always I appreciate your patience. As you all are aware, I represent Tennessee's 7th Congressional District, and it encompasses Montgomery County, Tennessee, which is Clarksville, and there you have located Fort Campbell. And Fort Campbell is home to the storied 101st Airborne, the most deployed unit in the U.S. military, the 5th Special Forces Group, and the Army's 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment. Approximately 1,900 officers and 26,000 enlisted personnel call Fort Campbell home. Like many installations across the country, Fort Campbell was facing troop cuts. I was pleased to see that Fort Campbell was spared major troop reductions. We're grateful for that. I was pleased to work with this committee last year in support of the Army Flying Hours program. This vital program provides aviation training resources for individual crew members and units according to approved aviation training strategies. In addition, it also provides individual and collective proficiency in support of ongoing combat and non-combat air operations. For aviation units like the 101st, this training is not only vital to mission success, but to the safety of our personnel. Without the necessary funding, home station training opportunities will not be available to achieve optimal combat readiness. I ask the members of this committee to once again pay close attention to the restoring of the Flying Hours program to its full capacity in fiscal year 17. I would also like to bring to this committee's attention that further reducing our nation's armed forces will hamstring our ability to meet the challenges and threats of an increasingly destabilized world. As America withdraws from the international community, countries like Russia are becoming increasingly brazen. We see it in the annexation of Crimea by Russian-backed separatists, civil war in Yemen and Syria, and China's military buildup. As discord continues to grow around the world, the U.S. must have the personnel and capabilities to respond and protect our national interests. Soldiers from Fort Campbell are always tasked with responding to threats to our national security around the globe. We would be putting their lives in increased danger by reducing their numerical strength and not providing them with the training that they need. That is why I support H.R. 4534, the Protecting Our Security Through Utilizing Right Size End Strength, or Posture Act. H.R. 4534 would reverse the current drawdown of the end strength levels for the U.S. land forces, specifically the Army and Marines. It will freeze the current down draw on Marine personnel levels and increase Army end strength levels. General Ham recently testified that it takes 3 years to stand back up a fully ready brigade combat team. And this legislation would make sure that we need to address this issue in a destabilized world. Thank you for allowing me to come before you with the testimony. I appreciate your attention to the details of the issues.
I appreciate the gentlelady. I think there's a lot of support on this committee for the proposal that she was just talking about. Our challenge, of course, is going to be budgetary, depending on how the budget and allocations work out. Are there any questions of the gentlelady? Thank you, ma'am. Appreciate you being with us and raising those issues. Next, we have the distinguished gentleman from the state of Texas, a neighbor to Mr. Conaway and me, Mr. Nagelbauer, recognized for 4 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Thornberry, for holding this important hearing. I'd like to take this opportunity to testify before this committee today on my national defense priorities. My district, Texas 19 Congressional District, is home of 5,100 military and civilian personnel stationed at Dice Air Force Base. Located on the outskirts of the city of Abilene, Dice houses, among the other missions, the 7th Bomb Wing, home of to 33 of the 62 B-1 Lancer strategic bombers. As a part of the FY 2017 budget, the Air Force has proposed a $5.8 million in research, development, and test and evaluation funding for the B-1 and $116.3 million in procurement funding. Throughout its proposed 2017 budget, the Air Force includes funding in other accounts for various improvements to the B-1s, as well as funding for B-1 maintenance and funding for the new B-1 Classic Associate Reserve Unit at Dice Air Force Base. Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member, I request the committee's support for these essential B-1 programs as it considers the FY 2017 NDAA. Since 2001, the B-1 bomber has played a vital role in Afghanistan and Iraq and is now a major force in our battle against ISIL. In its budget documents, the Air Force highlights the B-1's critical importance to our national defense, stating, that the B-1 Lancer, and I quote, is a swing-wing supersonic long-range conventional bomber. It carries the largest payload, both guided and unguided weapons, in the Air Force inventory. The multi-mission B-1B is the backbone of America's long-range bomber force and can rapidly deliver massive quantities of precision and non-precision weapons against any adversary anywhere in the world at any time. The current service life for the B-1 is beyond 2040. As further evidence of the B-1's importance, it was the first aircraft to be fitted for the Joint Air-to-Surface Standoff Missile Extended Range, and along with the F-18 will be the initial aircraft to carry the Navy's long-range anti-ship missile. In its request for the 2017 Overseas Contingency Operation funding, the Air Force stated, as a force provider to the U.S. Central Command area of responsibility, the primary combat forces are the Air Force's frontline fighters and bombers, the A-10, the B-1, F-15, and F-16, representing the tip of the global power projection spear. These assets provide strong capability to counter a wide range of threats to the U.S. and its allies, as well as to help assure a viable deterrent posture in the region. As the backbone of the long-range bomber force, as the tip of the global power projection spear, and with a service life of beyond 2040, it makes sense for our national defense standpoint and for a fiscal standpoint to ensure that the B-1 continues to receive the funding it needs in order to remain effective and efficient and viable today and in the future. I request that the committee continue to support funding for 2017 and beyond. I'd also like to request the committee's continued support for the new long-range strike bomber, which the Air Force has designated as the B-21. This new bomber has been under development for several years, and it is essential that the Air Force complete the necessary research work and begin the production of this aircraft in order to meet the goal of having it operational by the mid-2020s. As the Air Force and Congress move forward with the new bomber, we support the selection of Dulles Air Force Base to host the B-21. Dulles has been a bomber base since its inception more than 50 years ago, initially hosting B-47s and then B-52s, and then for the past 30 years, Dulles has been the Air Force's primary B-1 base. Dulles has also successfully served as the B-1 Formal Training Unit and now has the B-1 Classic Associate Reserve Unit. With a strong track record of meeting long-range strike mission requirements, Dulles would be an excellent base for the B-21. Thank you again, Chairman, for holding these hearings, and I appreciate this committee's important work is keeping America safe, and we'd be glad to take any questions.
Any questions for the gentleman from Texas? Gentlemen may be interested to know that just yesterday the committee held a meeting where the importance of the B-1 in the current fight was absolutely confirmed. So I appreciate the points the gentleman raises on both programs, and we certainly appreciate his testimony here today. Next, we have a distinguished gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Bost. Appreciate you being with us, sir. Recognized for 4 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Thornberry, and Ranking Member for having me here today and for allowing me to give my comments, and those comments will be brief. I intend to discuss 2 items I hope will be included in the NDAA. Legislation included in House Resolution 4341 to modernize Small Business Administration size standards for agricultural product producers and the Navy's anticipated need for additional FA-18 strike fighters. You know, President Eisenhower once said, farming looks pretty easy as long as you do it with a pencil and you're about 1,000 miles from a cornfield. Unfortunately, this quote is accurate, and when describing the statutory establishment size standards for agricultural producers. Agricultural producers is an important contribution to the American economy. According to the USDA, the total value of farm products exceeds $390 billion, and the agricultural industry supports 16 million domestic jobs. Family-owned farms still account for a majority of farms and ranches in the United States. However, farming and ranching are low-margin industries. This has led to a consolidation of many single family-owned operations into larger multi-family-owned operations. But By any reasonable definition, these operations remain small business. Unfortunately, the current small business size standard for agriculture has been set by statute and is outdated. The standard is too low for the vast majority of farms and ranches to participate in potential government contracting and subcontracting opportunities. In addition, the statutory standard has no reasonable basis for why it is set that. It appears that the Congress at one time just decided to pick a number out of the air, and the previous Congress just set that number. And it was 30 years since its enactment of the size standard, but the Small Business Administration has significantly improved its process to determine small business size standards. This should address whatever issue previous Congresses had when it would establish the statutory size standard. I believe that the importance that Congress and federal agencies promote consistency in H.R. 4341 will help ensure consistency, and I encourage its adoption by the committee. But lastly, I'd like to also discuss the Navy's need for an additional F-18 strike fighters. The F-18 is currently the only operational strike fighter line for the United States Navy, and it is significant, in national security assets should be acted to protect. The FY 2016 NDAA and the FY 2016 Department of Defense Appropriations Act included funding for the procurement of 12 FA-18s. However, this number may still be short of what the U.S. Navy needs, as the service has previously testified to a potential shortfall of 24 to 36 aircraft. The procurement of additional FA-18 Super Hornets is critical to meeting the anticipated needs of the United States Navy and to keeping the production line open for the United States prepares anticipated aircraft sales to allied nations. It's important to preserve the value of the St. Louis region defense industry base as well. Therefore, I request the authorization of any aircraft requests by the United States Navy. And once again, I thank you for allowing me the opportunity to appear here today, and I'd be glad to answer any questions to the committee.
Thank you, gentlemen. Are there any questions? I know the chairman of the Agriculture Committee was paying particular attention to the testimony of the gentleman on that part of the small business package, but I appreciate the gentleman being here and sharing his thoughts with us.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Pleased to welcome the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Yoho, before the committee. The gentleman's recognized for 4 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member Smith, for the opportunity to come and speak before this committee. This is a great chance you are affording members of Congress who do not sit on armed services. Today, I'd like to speak to you about a transfer of property and detainees from Guantanamo Bay Naval Station. As you know, it is currently illegal for the President to transfer detainees from the base to the United States, but the actual base itself can be transferred back to the Castro government without the consent of the U.S. Congress. Recently, the Castro government demanded that in order for normalization to continue between Cuba and the United States, the Guantanamo Bay Naval Base must be transferred back to Cuba. The 1903 lease agreement between the governments of Cuba and the United States are controlled by the language of the 1934 treaty, stipulating that the lease can only be modified or abrogated pursuant to an agreement between the United States and Cuba. The territorial limits of the naval station remain as they were in 1934 unless the United States abandons Guantanamo Bay or the two governments reach an agreement to modify its boundaries. While there appears to be no consensus on whether the President can modify the agreement alone, Congress is empowered to alter that statute by the statute the effect of the underlying 1934 treaty. A statute passed later than a treaty is recognized to supersede the terms of the treaty, at least as far as domestic law is concerned. Although not firmly established, it seems likely that Congress could override any implications that might be drawn from the 1934 treaty with respect to presidential authority to modify the Guantanamo lease by enacting legislation specifying that any such modification must be accomplished with the advice and consent of the Senate or the concurrence of Congress. In fact, Congress has passed legislation establishing policy with respect to Guantanamo leases as part of the Cuban Liberty and Democratic Solidarity Act, or known as Libertad. Congress established that the policy of the United States is to be prepared to enter into negotiations with a democratic elected government in Cuba, either to return the United States naval base at Guantanamo to Cuba or to renegotiate the present agreement under mutual agreeable terms. The provision appears to approve negotiations by the President with the democratic Cuban government, and in that Libertad agreement, it says that the freedoms and the liberty of the Cuban people must be enhanced with that agreement. Let's see. The provision appears to approve negotiations by the President with a democratic Cuban government over the possible return of Guantanamo Bay, but it does not explicitly approve the entry into such an agreement as a congressional executive agreement. Moreover, it does not expressly prohibit the negotiations of lease modifications with the existing Cuban government. It can be argued that an executive agreement with Cuba to close the base would in effect amount to an executive agreement pursuant to the 1934 treaty and would thus not require the advice and consent of the Senate. In order to protect this potential unilateral action by the President, I introduced H.R. 4126, the Guantanamo Transfer Prevention Act, which among other things would prevent the President from unilaterally ceding the base back to the Cuban government without the advice and consent of Congress. It has 68 co-sponsors on it at this time. While I work to move my stand-alone bill, I want to take this time to urge the Armed Service Committee to take similar actions in protecting against this potential for executive action and to ensure that President must come to Congress first via the authorization process, that no authorization be given to transfer the Guantanamo Bay Naval Base. I thank you for this opportunity and the time here.
Any questions for the gentleman? I appreciate the gentleman's suggestions. We did have a provision in last year's NDAA to prevent the transfer of the naval base back to Cuba, but I think the gentleman raises a number of interesting questions about how to strengthen that or make it more permanent, because certainly it's only what we have in law is only for the fiscal year.
Right, and it's such a strategic place in the Caribbean and national security interests.
Yeah. There are no questions. Appreciate the gentleman being here.
Thank you for your
very
time.
much for your suggestions. And if no other members seeking recognition, the committee stands adjourned.